Good morning, everyone. Bruno Rodriguez here, incident meteorologist, joined by our interpreter, Jasmine. Ready to talk some weather. So we've had quite a bit of it, and we have quite a lot of weather coming up over the next few days as well, unfortunately. It's going to be pretty much the center of attention here on the incident as far as critical fire weather conditions are concerned. So first, let's touch a little bit on what we saw yesterday. It was a very much more active day on the fire, and that was really expected with the change in weather conditions. We saw humidity coming down quite a bit more than previous days, so it bottomed out really in the mid-single digits, had a couple places down in the Pecos Valley, right around 6% in the afternoon. So very, very dry, bone dry, really. And then last night we saw pretty much more of the same that we saw during the day, so very dry conditions as well. Overnight recoveries were really what I would call poor. Most of the weather stations up in this southern portion of the fire, outside of kind of the Pecos wilderness, were mostly in the 20 to kind of 25% range. So I have a graphic over here showing the outline of the fire and the highest humidities that were actually observed last night. So down here in the southern corner, you can see just 22% at the Pecos weather station on the southwest end. This is Elk Mountain at 24% and even 20% here just northwest of Rociada. You'll notice a little bit of some higher values to the west. So this is close to the Pecos wilderness. Over there, a lot of kind of deep drainages, so cold air pools pretty well there, which is why over the past few nights we've been seeing a little bit better recoveries up there. But a lot of the upper elevations and kind of exposed areas of the fire definitely got down or didn't really get very moist last night. Northern end of the fire faring much better last night. You can see humidities in the Mora and Chacon areas around 40 to 50% there. Current humidity, if we switch over to that right there, yep. You can see drying out very quickly right now as of probably 30 minutes ago or so. Looking at humidity beginning to creep almost into the single digits, lots of low teens out there. Elk Mountain, given its elevation, still just hovering up around 18%. So very dry out there once again, and we're going to see that persist for the next several days. So for today, what are we looking at? Well, fairly similar to yesterday in terms of the humidity, maybe just 1 or 2% lower than what we saw yesterday. Temperatures, though, considerably higher. I think we're going to be in the mid to high 80s today for a lot of the lower elevations, and probably high 70s to low 80s for some of those higher elevations and a lot of the fire footprint itself. Winds still that prevailing kind of west or even southwest direction, picking up just a little bit in intensity today. So we're going to see sustained winds this afternoon increase to between 20 and 25 miles an hour, and could see a few gusts up to 30 miles an hour in the afternoon. There is one little caveat, and that is that we're going to see a little bit of an influx in moisture up high. So that'll come in probably late afternoon, early evening. With that, we could see a little bit of virga. I sent some jokes coming with that with our Spanish speakers. But I know Bladen's talked about that plenty in the past, so just elevated showers, rain, not really reaching the ground, especially considering how dry it's going to be near the surface. So that'll come in late this evening, and that could play a role in a couple ways. First, again, no precip, but still some downdrafts from those virga possible, which could produce a little bit of outflow winds at the surface. So we're going to be watching for that potential. Could see a few gusts out there to 35 miles an hour, probably mostly after 6 p.m. for the threat of those gusts. Biggest threat will be along the kind of I-25 corridor and impacting some of these southwestern divisions, but can't completely rule it out for any part of the fire. Since I'm on the topic of elevated moisture, so there's one good tool that we use to kind of identify that feature, and we're going to kind of geek out a little bit on that right now. So this overly complicated graphic is something that we call a skew-T diagram. So this is essentially a graph that plots a couple of variables that we measure with weather balloons. So twice per day, almost every National Weather Service office launches a weather balloon, once in the morning and once late afternoon usually. So again, pretty much all Weather Service offices across the country launch at the same time, and then the data that's collected with that weather balloon as it ascends through the atmosphere is plotted on this graph, where on the bottom you basically have a temperature axis, and then the y-axis here is essentially just your elevation as you go up in height. So down here is just your near surface conditions, and then up here is your upper atmosphere conditions. So these weather balloons, as they ascend, will measure a few things. First is going to be your temperature, and this red line is depicting the measured temperature from this morning's launch out of the Albuquerque office. Your green line here represents dew point, and I'll try and explain as simply as I can what we mean by dew point. I know sometimes it's mentioned by TV meteorologists out there, and I think for the most part the public maybe doesn't quite understand what it means. So if you picture a small glass of water and it's half full, your relative humidity in that case would be 50%. You're at 50% saturation essentially. Your dew point represents the physical amount of water in that glass. So if you go and pour the water in that small glass into, say, a shot glass that's half the size, you have the same amount of water, you haven't spilled any anywhere, so your dew point hasn't changed. Your dew point is the same because it's the physical amount of water that you're dealing with, or in the case of the weather that's in the atmosphere or in an air parcel. But you have a smaller glass. You've reduced the size by half. So your relative humidity is now 100%, assuming your shot glass is completely full. So that's kind of how relative humidity and dew point relate to each other. Dew point is just another way that we measure the moisture in the atmosphere. So when we look at a skew-T diagram, we can figure out where the moisture is, if any, in the atmosphere. So you'll see there's a very large gap between the temperature trace here and the dew point near the surface. So that indicates, again, thinking of that glass, you have just a minimal amount of water in the glass versus the size of your glass, which in this case would represent really your temperature. And that makes sense, right? We're dealing with single-digit humidities today and really for the next several days. And then as you go up, this is probably around 15,000 foot elevation. You see the lines get a little bit closer together, still not super close, but it's an indication that there's a little bit more moisture up high in the atmosphere. Again, this one was from this morning, so this afternoon's skew-T diagram, I'm sure, will show these lines get a little closer together, showing us just how much moisture we are up high in the atmosphere. We do have the ability to launch weather balloons too on incidents, but it can be a little bit hard to acquire helium. It's something I'm working on right now, but there is a bit of a helium shortage. So my hope is that over the next few days we'll get a tank of helium delivered, and if we do, I will try and work with the public information officers here on the incident and see if we can get a video recorded for you guys just to show how that process works, what a weather balloon looks like. Hopefully you guys would enjoy that. Again, contingent on the delivery of the helium. Also on a skew-T diagram, just for kicks, on the very right there are what we call wind barbs plotted. So that basically just shows you the strength of the wind and the direction of the wind with height. So we use this a lot as meteorologists to figure out exactly what's going on in the atmosphere. So back to the actual weather. Today, again, late we're going to see a little bit more moisture coming in, and that's going to linger as well into Saturday. So a few more clouds, and with that also comes the potential for what we call pyrocumulus clouds, and you might have seen them 1 or 2 days before on this incident. And essentially, it boils down to just a fire-generated cloud, assuming you have enough fire activity on the ground and enough heat energy. That column can rise to the point where it condenses and forms a cloud, a pyrocumulus cloud. So we are looking at that potential both today and tomorrow. And when we do get that pyrocumulus formation, if it's deep enough, that can actually kind of feed back into the weather at the surface and influence things like wind direction and wind speeds and ultimately fire behavior. So that's something that folks here are well aware of and keyed in on as we head into this afternoon and tomorrow. Looking a little forward, so tonight again, very poor recoveries, and that's really going to be the name of the game as we head into the weekend. We do have now a red flag warning in effect for tomorrow. Not for today yet. Winds probably won't quite meet that criteria, but the local office did upgrade the watch to a warning for tomorrow, and we'll likely have another one on Sunday and another one on Monday. I know that's not what folks want to hear. The good news, though, is that winds are still going to remain out of that prevailing west or southwest direction through the period. So overall, that's a favorable direction, considering that really the active fire and areas of concern are along this western edge of the fire. So overall, wind direction is going to be favorable despite the conditions themselves being very critical. Still looking as we look forward at gusts probably in the 40 to 50 range both Sunday and Monday. Models have been flip-flopping a bit on in terms of when we'll see the strongest winds. Right now it's looking like Sunday with potential for gusts of 50 miles an hour. Should be cooling down just a little bit each day, but overall still very warm, very dry, and definitely much windier come the weekend. You'll notice a little bit of green and yellow creeping in on Wednesday. So as I mentioned a day or two ago, we are still looking at a likely change in the weather pattern. Still a little bit fuzzy on the details, so we're not really sure whether that's going to materialize into mostly dry thunderstorms, which this time of year are relatively typical here in New Mexico, or potentially some beneficial wetting rains. So it could play out a number of different ways. In any case, we're pretty confident in that we'll see a significant change in the weather pattern that will bring quite a few benefits regardless of exactly how that plays out. It's going to be more moist, no doubt. It's going to be significantly cooler. And it should also bring a change in wind direction to out of the east to some degree. So we'll be watching for that. With that, I will leave it there. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys again tomorrow.